The great aim of our legislation has been to do away with the tribal system and to assimilate the Indian people in all respects. Sir John A. Macdonald, May 2nd, 1887.
Residential schools began their century-long indigenous cultural genocide in the 1870s. Indigenous children were forcibly taken thousands of miles away from family and secluded from their own culture with severe punishments such as needles in the tongue for speaking their own language. Children also suffered from all forms of excessive abuse. It's estimated that 6,000 children died, and more than 150,000 children were civilized in horrible conditions, causing long-lasting damages to the indigenous culture and contributing to their poor physical, mental, and economic conditions. However, with the general public's indifference and the propaganda created by the government, what happened inside the residential schools and their rooted harm to the indigenous communities remained secretive for a long time. By the 1980s, indigenous people began to speak out publicly about their experiences of abuse, and with increasing tolerance for the indigenous communities, in 2008, former Prime Minister Stephen Harper gave out Canada's formal apology to the indigenous community.
The Government of Canada sincerely apologizes and asks the forgiveness of the Aboriginal peoples of this country for failing them so profoundly.
However, 67% of Canadians still think that the residential schools does not contribute to the current Indigenous challenges, and programs like the Child Foster Service is called by many the residential school for a new generation. Has the Indigenous community in Canada really gotten their so-called justice? The Child Foster Service, or CFS, was initially designed to arrange foster homes for children whose biological parents fail their parental responsibilities. However, according to Gillian Wheeler, former social worker at CFS,
there were many times we could have prevented apprehension, but that's exactly what happened. It was always people of lower economic means, lower education, people that were really victimized by the system that didn't know their rights.
This helpless Indigenous mother in Manitoba is about to witness her baby taken away by the police officers for no valid reasons.
Okay, guys, we're not going to discuss this any further. Child and Family Services has the power to apprehend the child. Okay, we're going to act. We're going to actually physically remove the baby. So are you going to comply? If not, we're going to have to physically remove the baby. No, sorry.
There's no time to say
goodbye.
goodbye.
No, it has to be right now.
Zach Ironstad, taken by the CFS at the age of 5, describes what life was like for him in foster care.
Some of us went to a hotel, some of us went to different foster parents.
The CFS children were under poor custody with little affections and no education. Zach admits that he used to deal with anger and loneliness in the wrong way by committing crimes like robbery. Thousands more Indigenous children are still being apprehended, and many of them share similar experiences with Zach, going in the wrong direction of life, not to mention the long-term or even permanent seclusion from their family and culture. Without the long-term abuse and suppression of the use of language and culture, CFS indeed seems like a better place for Indigenous children comparing to the residential schools. Also, though still being the minority, positive aspects of the Indigenous challenges still exist. With increasing public awareness towards Indigenous challenges, more organizations such as Aboriginal Healing Foundations, Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and Indigenous Youth Outreach Program have started to give out economic, education, and other social supports for the Aboriginals. However, children are still forcibly taken to programs like the Child Foster Services, leaving tens of thousands of broken, helpless Aboriginal families struggling to get their well-deserved reunion, waiting for their justice to arrive. Since many children in CFS are kept in white foster families, many of them are disconnected from their language and culture, and some can no longer communicate with their family members even after their reunion.
So when they were finished there, their parents didn't accept them because they weren't native. And the white community did not accept them because they were native. So these people, those 150,000 children, grew up in limbo with no roots, no background, and no place they could call home.
The sense of detachment from intimate companions and affections, along with the struggle of identities of these Indigenous children, have greatly contributed to their mental health issues. The lack of adequate education resources has also caused these people's high unemployment rate and a consequently high poverty rate. And the most disappointing thing, none of these conditions are getting better, not at least over the past decade. Most Canadians are still getting to know these unbeknown truths, and more actions need to be taken in order to indeed solve the Indigenous challenges.
We should be clear as we sit here, we are really just at the beginning of this process. Like, we're still at the beginning of the truth stage, despite all of the testimony. More Canadians need to hear these things in order for us to get to where we need to get.